For 6 months, Mike's life had felt like a bad dream, a hollowed-out version of reality. His marriage to Jessica, once a vibrant tapestry of shared moments and easy laughter, had faded to a whisper, a ghost of its former self. Her laugh, the sound that used to pull him back from the brink on the toughest days in the city, was gone. The reassuring touch, the gentle squeeze of his hand that used to anchor him, was now a distant memory, a forgotten language. Jessica had become a stranger, her behavior shifting in ways that kept Mike awake at night, staring at the ceiling of their Upper West Side apartment. Their conversations, once filled with dreams whispered in the dark and inside jokes that only they understood, had shrunk to curt exchanges about groceries, Con Edison bills, and the grim headlines scrolling across the news. The intimacy they had shared, both the quiet comfort of knowing glances and the passionate nights that bound them together, had vanished. Every attempt Mike made to bridge the widening canyon between them was met with a wall of indifference, sometimes outright rejection. He still felt the sting of the last time he tried to connect, reaching out to rest his hand on hers as they sat side by side on their worn couch, supposedly watching a movie. She'd flinched, pulling away as if burned, muttering some vague excuse about being exhausted. That night, the city lights painting shadows across their bedroom, Mike realized he couldn't even remember the last time Jessica had willingly touched him. Memories of their early days, their whirlwind romance that had started in a crowded bar in the village and blossomed against the backdrop of Central Park picnics and late-night talks on fire escapes, replayed in his mind, bittersweet and haunting. Back then, she'd been his best friend, his confidant, his partner in everything. They'd shared dreams as big and bright as the city skyline, laughter that echoed through their tiny apartment, plans for a future that now felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Now, it was as if she'd locked him out, brick by brick, erecting an impenetrable wall between them, leaving him stranded on the wrong side. The uncertainty was a constant ache. Mike couldn't pinpoint the moment things had fractured, couldn't understand what had changed or why. Had he done something wrong? Had he failed to notice some silent cry for help? He spent countless hours replaying moments, searching for the hairline crack in their happiness, the point where their laughter started to fade, but Jessica offered no clues, no explanations. Whenever he dared to ask what was wrong, she'd dismiss him with a curt, "Everything's fine, Mike." Her tone clipped, her gaze averted, as if she couldn't bear to even look at him anymore. It wasn't just the silence that cut him. It was the growing, suffocating feeling that Jessica no longer cared, that the affection she used to shower him with, the warmth that had drawn him to her in the first place, had simply evaporated, leaving him feeling abandoned, adrift in the vastness of their once shared life. He tried everything he could think of to reignite the spark, to remind her of who they used to be. He planned romantic dinners at their favorite Italian place in Little Italy, surprised her with small gifts, a vintage book he knew she'd love, flowers from the corner deli, even suggesting couples counseling, desperate for a lifeline. But each effort was met with the same tired excuses. Too busy, too stressed, too exhausted. After months of walking on eggshells, of trying and failing, Mike was starting to lose hope, to wonder if there was anything left to salvage. He'd reached his breaking point, standing on the edge of a precipice. The silence, the unanswered questions that echoed in the cavernous space between them, the ever-widening distance, had become unbearable. He couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep living in this hollow charade of a marriage. Tonight, he decided, was the night. He would confront the tension head-on. No more tiptoeing around the issue. No more brushing things under the rug. He needed answers, even if the truth shattered everything they had left. After a strained dinner eaten in near silence, Mike found Jessica in the living room, bathed in the blue light of her phone screen, scrolling mindlessly. Her expression was blank, distant, her focus miles away. For a moment, doubt gnawed at him, the weight of fear pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. But then, summoning every ounce of courage he possessed, he stepped forward, planting himself in front of her. "Jessica," Mike began, his voice steady despite the weariness that laced through it. "We need to talk." She barely glanced up from her phone, her thumb still swiping across the screen. "Can it wait, Mike? I'm in the middle of something." "No, it can't," he replied, his voice firming, moving to stand directly in her line of sight. "I can't keep living like this, wondering what happened to us, what happened to you. I need to know what's going on." Jessica sighed, finally setting her phone aside, though her posture remained closed off, defensive, her arms crossed tightly over her chest like a shield. "What is this about now, Mike?" Mike took a deep breath, trying to keep the tremor of emotion out of his voice. "It's about us, Jessica. About how distant you've been for the past 6 months. You've shut me out, emotionally and physically, like we're strangers sharing the same zip code. I need to know why." Her expression hardened, her eyes narrowing as she shook her head dismissively. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said sharply, her voice clipped and cold. "You're overthinking everything as usual." Frustration bubbled up in Mike, hot and sharp. "Overthinking?" he repeated, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "Jessica, we don't even touch anymore. You pull away every time I try to get close. You won't talk to me, really talk to me. You act like I'm some kind of intruder in your own life. I'm your husband, Jessica. Don't I deserve an explanation?" Jessica's eyes narrowed further, her voice chillingly calm, each word precisely enunciated, like daggers thrown in the dark. "Mike, my body is my choice," she said evenly, her gaze unwavering. "And in general, you should ask permission before you even think about touching me. I live my life the way I see fit, and I won't allow my boundaries to be crossed." Her words hit Mike like a physical blow, each syllable a punch to the gut. He stared at her, stunned, speechless for a moment, the air knocked out of him. "What?" he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging in the tense air between them. "Jessica, this is new. This isn't you. For the last 6 months, it's like you've become someone else." "Do you even hear yourself? None of this makes any sense." Jessica's expression turned icy, her voice sharpening. laced with a venom he'd never heard directed at him before. "I used to be naive," she snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. "I let you influence me, let you control me. But I've learned better now. A woman deserves more rights than a man, and you need to respect my choices and meet my demands." Mike felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him, the familiar landscape of his marriage tilting into something unrecognizable, alien. The woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, now seemed like a stranger, speaking words that felt ripped from some dystopian script. "Jessica," he said again, his voice trembling with disbelief, pleading for some semblance of reason, some flicker of the woman he knew. "What are you talking about? I've never disrespected you. I've always given you freedom, compromised for you. Have you been reading some kind of radical stuff online?" Her eyes flashed with even more fury, her cheeks flushing crimson. "There it is," she shot back, her voice rising, cracking with rage. "You're already accusing me, trying to belittle me, painting me as irrational. And don't think I don't see what this is really about, Mike. You're mad because I stopped sleeping with you. That's all men like you care about, your lust." Mike buried his face in his hands, running a hand roughly through his hair, struggling to process the sheer absurdity of her accusations, the venomous hatred in her eyes. Frustration mixed with a deep gnawing despair as he began to wonder, truly wonder for the first time, if there was anything left to salvage in their marriage, if they were already lost beyond recovery. When he finally looked up at her, his expression was a mixture of pain and exasperation, the fight draining out of him, leaving behind only a hollow ache. "Fine, Jessica," he said slowly, his voice heavy with resignation, the weight of their broken promises pressing down on him. "If that's how you want to frame it, then here's my response. My wallet is my choice. My money is my choice. So here's the deal. You're going to get a full-time job and pay half of our expenses. How's that for respecting choices?" Jessica's face contorted with rage, her features twisting into a mask of fury. "That's manipulation," she shouted, her voice rising to a screech. "Mike, you're acting like an abuser. I knew you'd resort to blackmail, try to control me emotionally." "Manipulation," Mike shot back, throwing his hands up in disbelief, the last vestiges of his patience shattering. "Jessica, I don't even know who you are anymore. When did you lose yourself like this?" Jessica jumped to her feet, trembling with fury, her body vibrating with rage. "This is exactly why I've changed," she snapped, spitting the words out like poison. "Because men like you think they can gaslight women into submission." Mike stood as well, his own anger finally boiling over, a molten eruption after months of simmering beneath the surface. "Gaslight you?" he roared, his voice echoing in the suddenly charged silence of their apartment. "I've spent months trying to save this marriage, trying to figure out what's wrong, trying to fix it, and all you've done is shut me out and treat me like I'm the enemy." A tense silence descended, heavy and suffocating, filling the room, both of them breathing heavily, their anger colliding like a summer storm breaking over the city. Mike felt a deep, overwhelming sadness creep in, heavier than anything he had felt before, a crushing weight of loss. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a battlefield, a war zone of accusations and resentment. Turning away, he couldn't bear to look at her, at the stranger she had become. For the first time, the thought of divorce didn't feel like a failure, but like a desperate, necessary escape, a way out of the suffocating darkness that had enveloped their lives. The next morning, after the volcanic eruption of the night before, Mike found himself sitting in his car, a nondescript sedan parked across the street from a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. A discreet brass plaque beside the entrance read, "Miller and Zoas, attorneys at law." His stomach churned, a knot of anxiety tightening in his gut as he wrestled with the enormity of what he was about to do. He wasn't someone who made rash decisions, who acted on impulse, but the idea of spending the rest of his life trapped in a loveless, hostile marriage, a constant state of emotional warfare, was unbearable. A slow, agonizing death. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Ms. Miller, greeted Mike with a firm handshake and a composed, professional demeanor that instantly put him somewhat at ease. Over the next hour, in the quiet, wood-paneled office overlooking a tree-lined street, Mike laid out his story, his frustrations pouring out in a torrent of words, detailing Jessica's erratic behavior, her emotional and physical withdrawal, and her sudden embrace of bizarre, alienating ideas that had systematically dismantled their once meaningful connection. Ms. Miller listened intently, her expression impassive, occasionally jotting down notes in a legal pad without interrupting, allowing him to fully unburden himself. When Mike finally finished, the silence in the room felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken questions and difficult realities. Ms. Miller leaned back in her chair, adjusting her reading glasses thoughtfully, her gaze sharp and assessing. "It's a difficult situation, Mr. Davis," Ms. Miller began, her tone measured, carefully neutral, "but not entirely uncommon. Significant personality changes and a refusal to engage can sometimes point to external factors. It could be ideological, something she's gotten deeply involved in, some online community or group, or it could be more personal." Mike frowned, a new knot of unease tightening in his stomach. "Personal? Are you suggesting there might be someone else?" Ms. Miller shrugged lightly, a non-committal gesture. "That's one possibility, Mr. Davis. But let's not jump to conclusions, not yet. Before you make assumptions, before we take any drastic steps, it's important to focus on practical steps, on gathering information. You have options here. We can draft the divorce papers now, start the process immediately, or you can take some time to monitor the situation, to try to understand what's really happening. Gaining clarity, understanding the underlying causes, might provide clarity and a strategic advantage, especially if this goes to court." Mike nodded slowly, absorbing her advice, the weight of her words settling in. "Let's hold off on the paperwork for now," he said finally, making a decision. "I need to see how things unfold first. I need to understand what's really going on with her." That evening, back in their strained, silent apartment, Mike sat at the kitchen table, the fluorescent light casting a harsh glare on the Formica surface. He opened a notebook, a plain, spiral-bound thing, and methodically began to calculate their monthly expenses. Mortgage payments on their Brooklyn brownstone, utilities, soaring Con Edison bills, groceries from Whole Foods, and the endless other necessities of New York life. After tallying the total, He drew a line and divided it in half. His portion, thankfully, was already covered by his salary, but he carefully wrote down the exact dollar amount Jessica would need to contribute to cover her share. A stark, undeniable figure. Next, Mike retrieved a small, worn wooden box from the back of the hall closet. A box they'd gotten years ago at a flea market in Chelsea, a relic of happier times. He placed it prominently on the kitchen counter, right in the center, in Jessica's line of sight. The gesture was simple, almost understated, but unmistakable in its message, a silent declaration of a new reality. Later that evening, as Jessica walked into the kitchen, her phone in hand, her attention seemingly elsewhere, Mike was seated at the table, the notebook and the wooden box in front of him, waiting. "Jessica," he said calmly, his voice even, controlled. "This is a breakdown of our monthly expenses." He gestured to the notebook. "I've covered my half." He nodded towards the wooden box. "The box is there for you to contribute yours." Jessica froze, her eyes narrowing, her gaze shifting from Mike to the box, then back again. "What is this supposed to mean, Mike?" she asked, her voice tight, wary. "It means," Mike replied evenly, meeting her gaze directly, "you've expressed a desire for independence and boundaries. I'm respecting that. If we're equals in this marriage, then we're equals in sharing the household responsibilities." Her face flushed, a slow burn of anger rising up her neck. "This is manipulation," she snapped, her voice laced with accusation. "You're punishing me because I won't play the role of the perfect little wife." "No, Jessica," Mike said, his tone steady but firm, unwavering. "I'm respecting your choices, but independence comes with responsibility. I've carried the financial burden of this family for years without complaint. If our dynamic is changing, then our arrangement needs to reflect that." Her voice rose, escalating, echoing in the small kitchen. "You know I don't have a job that pays like yours. This is unfair, Mike. You're being completely unreasonable." Mike didn't flinch, didn't back down. "Then maybe," he said calmly, gesturing again towards the wooden box, the silent, insistent presence on the counter, "it's time for that to change." He held her gaze, unwavering. "You have until the end of the month, Jessica." Jessica stormed out of the kitchen, muttering accusations of manipulation and emotional abuse under her breath, her voice a low, simmering growl. Mike didn't follow her, didn't engage. He stayed seated at the table, staring at the wooden box, feeling a strange mix of detachment and exhaustion. He wasn't angry anymore, not really, just drained, depleted, and profoundly, deeply tired. In the following weeks, Mike watched Jessica closely, observing her behavior, her reactions, her every move. Outwardly, she seemed to be coping, going through the motions of her days, but it was clear, increasingly clear, that she had no intention of making any meaningful changes. She frequently complained, loudly and bitterly, about Mike's unreasonable demands, his cruel manipulation, showed absolutely no interest in finding a better-paying job, or any job at all, and continued to spend her days scrolling endlessly through social media on her phone, or chatting for hours on the phone. The content of her conversations, a mystery to him. The wooden box sat conspicuously on the kitchen counter, a silent, accusing presence, conspicuously ignored, untouched. Mike didn't confront her, didn't nag or push. Instead, he observed, detached, almost clinical, as if analyzing a scientific experiment, watching the predictable results unfold. What struck him most, what he found most telling, was her simmering resentment, the barely concealed anger that flickered in her eyes whenever she looked at him. Jessica had always been proud, fiercely independent in her own way, but now that pride had twisted, warped into something darker, something more destructive, a stubborn, almost childlike defiance, a refusal to acknowledge reality. Whenever Mike raised even minor concerns, a late bill, a leaky faucet, the overflowing recycling bin, she deflected, instantly, reflexively, accusing him of being controlling, of micromanaging her life. As the end of the month approached, the wooden box remained stubbornly empty, a stark symbol of her unwillingness to engage, to participate, to take any responsibility for their shared life. Mike wasn't surprised, not really, but the complete lack of effort, the utter disregard for their agreement, still stung, a sharp, cold jab of disappointment. He had held on to a faint, fragile hope that Jessica might see this as an opportunity, a chance to step up, to show some commitment to their marriage, however fractured it had become. Instead, he saw only defiance, a petulant refusal to engage with their shared reality, a deliberate act of passive aggression. When the bills came due, piling up on the kitchen counter like unwelcome guests, Mike sat at the table again, the notebook and the untouched wooden box before him, dreading the inevitable confrontation, the explosion that was surely coming. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and called Jessica into the kitchen. She appeared moments later, arms crossed defensively, her expression sour, as if she already knew what was coming and resented him for it. "What now, Mike?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Mike gestured towards the box, the silent, empty vessel on the counter. "The bills are due," he said, his voice calm, even, "and it's still empty. If we don't pay them, we'll face late fees, penalties, maybe even worse." Jessica's scowl deepened, her lips curling into a sneer. "I'm aware, Mike," she snapped, her tone dismissive, impatient. "Stop nagging me." "Then what's the delay?" Mike asked, his voice remaining calm, measured, but with an underlying firmness that brooked no argument. "We agreed you'd cover your half." Her face turned red, the color rising up her neck to flush her cheeks, and her voice rose with it, escalating quickly. "Unbelievable, Mike. A real man handles the finances, not throws it back on his wife. You're pathetic." Mike's jaw tightened, his muscles clenching, but he fought to keep his tone even, controlled, refusing to be drawn into her emotional vortex. "A real partner," he countered, his voice still calm but edged with steel, "doesn't ignore her responsibilities. You pushed for these boundaries, Jessica. I've respected them. Now it's your turn." Jessica's eyes burned with fury, twin flames of rage, but for once she didn't argue, didn't launch into another tirade of accusations. Instead, she spun around, a whirlwind of anger, and stormed off towards the bedroom, slamming the door behind her with a force that rattled the windows. Mike could hear her rummaging through drawers, the sounds of things being thrown around, and muttering under her breath, a low, venomous stream of curses and accusations that he couldn't quite decipher, but didn't need to. Nearly 30 minutes later she reappeared, her face still flushed, her eyes still blazing, carrying a handful of crumpled cash and loose change, a pathetic offering. She marched back into the kitchen, her movements jerky, aggressive, and dropped the meager pile of money into the wooden box with a loud clatter, the coins scattering across the bottom. Her voice dripped with sarcasm, each word laced with venom. "There!" she spat, her chest heaving. "Happy now? That's all I've got." Mike glanced at the box, at the pathetic handful of cash, then back at her, his expression unreadable, betraying nothing of what he was feeling. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice low, devoid of emotion. But Jessica wasn't finished, her anger still simmering, threatening to boil over again. "You're just like every other selfish man," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage, her eyes narrowed, filled with hatred. "Obsessed with control and money." Mike didn't respond, didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He'd learned by now that engaging further, trying to reason with her, was futile, pointless. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, watching her silently, his gaze steady, unwavering, letting her rage burn itself out. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fall leaves and the distant hum of city traffic as Mike stood in the kitchen sipping his coffee, the ceramic mug warm in his hands. His phone rested on the counter, silent, waiting. He had called Ms. Miller earlier that morning, finally making the decision he'd been avoiding, postponing for weeks. "Get the papers ready," he'd said, his voice steady, strangely calm, but resigned, the weight of inevitability settling upon him. "It's time for a divorce." Ms. Miller had responded, her tone both professional and sympathetic, understanding the gravity of his decision. "The papers will be ready in a week, Mr. Davis." A week. It felt like just the right amount of time, a brief buffer, a space to breathe. It gave Mike the opportunity to observe Jessica, to watch her, to confirm what he already suspected, what he already knew in his heart. Their marriage was beyond repair, broken beyond mending. It also allowed him to prepare himself, emotionally and practically, for the inevitable confrontation, the final painful severing of ties. He planned to hand her the papers personally, face to face, not out of spite or malice, but because he wanted closure, needed to see her reaction, to witness the finality of it, and to finally end the suffocating tension, the constant, corrosive negativity that had gripped their home, poisoning the air they breathed. The week dragged on, each day blurring into the next, each sunrise bringing Mike a clearer, sharper view of Jessica's increasingly erratic, unsettling behavior. To his surprise, however, she seemed to calm down. The angry outbursts, the sharp, venomous retorts grew less frequent, replaced by a quieter, more withdrawn presence, a strange, unsettling passivity. She still spent hours scrolling through her phone, her face set in a mask of intense concentration, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. But the overt hostility, the open warfare, had subsided, replaced by something colder, more insidious. A chilling indifference, Whatever was happening beneath the surface, whatever storm was brewing inside her, Mike couldn't quite decipher, couldn't quite grasp. But he couldn't shake the gnawing sense that something was simmering beneath the surface of her newfound quiet, something hidden, something unresolved. When the divorce papers were finally ready, crisp and official, delivered in a sealed manila envelope, Mike felt an odd mixture of relief and unease, a strange cocktail of emotions swirling within him. He picked them up from Ms. Miller's office that afternoon, the weight of the envelope heavy in his briefcase, a physical manifestation of the ending of his marriage. He spent the rest of the day turning the situation over in his mind, replaying conversations, analyzing moments, trying to anticipate Jessica's reaction. This was it, he thought. The beginning of the end, the official start of the unraveling. As he sat at his desk in his home office, the envelope resting heavily in his lap, a stark white rectangle against the dark wood, he imagined how the evening would unfold. He'd wait for Jessica to return home from wherever she disappeared to each day, hand her the papers, and let her react however she chose, however she needed to. It would be painful, undoubtedly, a sharp, clean cut, but at least it would mark the end of a chapter, a definitive closing of the book on their broken marriage. That evening, Jessica threw Mike an unexpected curveball, something completely out of character, something that completely derailed his carefully laid plans. She was late, almost 2 hours past her usual time, and when she finally walked in, through the front door of their brownstone, Mike barely glanced up from the newspaper he was pretending to read. But something about her presence, something subtle, almost imperceptible, made him pause, made him look again. She seemed different. Her posture was more relaxed, less rigid, less guarded. Her face, usually tight with tension, drawn with anger, was softer, almost serene. The simmering anger, the constant undercurrent of hostility that had consumed her for months, seemed to have vanished, evaporated into thin air. Instead, she offered him a small, tentative smile, a shy, almost hesitant gesture that sent a jolt of confusion through him. "Hi," she said, setting her bag down on the floor with a soft thud, her voice surprisingly gentle, almost normal. "Hi," Mike replied, watching her carefully, his senses on high alert, trying to decipher this sudden, inexplicable shift. She moved around the kitchen with an ease, a naturalness he hadn't seen in months, pulling out a teapot from the cupboard, searching the pantry for tea bags, humming softly to herself. "I thought I'd make us some tea," she said, almost shyly, glancing at him over her shoulder. "It's been a while since we've just talked." Mike raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued, but his skepticism still firmly in place. "Tea?" he echoed, the question hanging in the air. "Yeah," she said, placing 2 mugs on the table, her movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. "I found some cookies in the pantry. Thought it might be nice to sit down for a bit, just relax." She smiled again, this time more brightly, a more genuine smile, and Mike felt a subtle shift in his guard, a tiny crack in the wall of suspicion he'd erected around himself. This wasn't the Jessica he'd been living with for the past 6 months, the angry, withdrawn stranger. It was as if she had suddenly, miraculously, remembered how to be the woman he had once married, the woman he had fallen in love with. He sat down at the table watching her, his gaze still wary, as she poured the tea, the steam rising in gentle plumes, and arranged the cookies on a small plate, her movements graceful, almost delicate. "Thanks," he said cautiously, accepting the mug she handed him, the warmth seeping through the ceramic. "This is unexpected." "I know," she replied, sitting down across from him, her gaze meeting his, holding it for a beat longer than it had in months. "I've been thinking a lot lately about us, about everything." Mike's heart skipped a beat, a flicker of hope, however fragile, igniting in his chest. He wanted to ask her what she meant, to demand answers, to understand this sudden, bewildering change. But he held back, biting his tongue, waiting, listening, watching, his senses on full alert, waiting to see if she would explain herself, if this was real or just another elaborate act. Their conversation started cautiously, tentatively, with small talk, superficial pleasantries about the kids, the weather, a neighbor's ridiculous new SUV. But as the minutes passed, as they sipped their tea and nibbled on cookies, Jessica seemed to ease into the conversation, her voice growing warmer, softer, almost nostalgic. Despite this subtle shift, despite the apparent change in her demeanor, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that this sudden, almost too perfect transformation was calculated. Her sudden warmth, her uncharacteristic kindness, her unexpected desire to talk, it all felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it, to unravel the puzzle. Had she somehow discovered his plans? Had she found the divorce papers? Was this an elaborate last-ditch attempt to save their marriage, to manipulate him into staying? Or was there something deeper, something darker at play, something he couldn't yet grasp, something hidden beneath the surface of her sudden, unsettling sweetness? By the time they finished their tea, the mugs now empty, the cookie plate almost bare, Mike had made his decision. The divorce papers, still sealed in their envelope, could wait until tomorrow. He needed more time, more information, more observation. He needed to watch Jessica, to study her, to figure out if this was real, if this was genuine, or just another elaborate manipulation, another carefully constructed performance. He wasn't about to let his guard down. Not yet. Not after everything that had happened. Not after the months of coldness and hostility. As they cleaned up together, a strange, almost surreal domestic tableau, Mike caught glimpses of Jessica from the corner of his eye, studying her surreptitiously. She appeared calm, almost content, her movements fluid, graceful, but he noticed the subtle signs of tension, the almost imperceptible tremors beneath the surface, her hands gripping the dishcloth a little too tightly as she wiped the counter, the slight stiffness in her jaw when she thought he wasn't looking, the fleeting shadows that flickered across her eyes when she turned away. Something was definitely off. Something wasn't right. But he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Couldn't quite define the unease that prickled at the edges of his awareness. Later that night, Mike moved to the dimly lit living room. The familiar routine now ingrained. Spreading out the bedding on the worn couch, the cushions saggy and familiar beneath his hands. This had been his nightly ritual for the past month and a half, his self-imposed exile from their bedroom, his once shared bed now a distant, forbidden territory. The sound of the shower running in the bathroom, a soft, rhythmic hum, was oddly comforting, a mundane sound in the otherwise silent apartment. But when Jessica emerged from the bathroom, the steam still clinging to her skin, her hair wrapped in a soft white towel, her face freshly scrubbed, glowing in the dim light, Mike was caught off guard, unprepared for the unexpected intimacy of the moment. She smiled at him softly, her eyes luminous, her tone unexpectedly warm, almost seductive. "I was thinking," she said casually, leaning against the doorway, her posture relaxed, almost inviting. "Maybe you could come back to our bedroom tonight." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, a subtle invitation. "It's been a while since we've shared a bed." Mike blinked, caught completely off guard by her sudden brazen shift in attitude, her unexpected proposition. He paused, trying to make sense of her words, her tone, the sudden dramatic change in her behavior. "I'm actually pretty tired, Jessica," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral, hedging, playing for time. "I have a long day ahead of me tomorrow." Her smile faded, just a little, replaced by a wistful look, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Too bad," she murmured, her voice softening, a trace of disappointment coloring her tone. "Sweet dreams then, Mike." She paused again, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary, a silent, unspoken message passing between them. "But," she added softly, almost a whisper, "if you change your mind, I'll be here, waiting." She turned then gracefully and walked away, disappearing into the darkened bedroom, leaving Mike standing there in the dimly lit living room, feeling utterly confused, profoundly unsettled, and more suspicious than ever. The rest of the night passed in restless silence, the city lights casting long, dancing shadows across the ceiling. As Mike lay on the couch, staring into the darkness, his thoughts kept circling back to that moment, replaying the scene in his mind, questioning everything, analyzing every word, every gesture, every nuance of Jessica's sudden, inexplicable transformation. Why now? He wondered, his mind racing, searching for answers. Why, of all days, on the very night he was planning to give her the divorce papers, had she suddenly, dramatically changed her behavior, as if the past 6 months of hostility and coldness had never happened? The shift felt deliberate, calculated, like a move in a game he hadn't even realized they were playing, a strategic maneuver in some unknown, unseen battle. His curiosity gnawed at him, pulling him deeper into the swirling vortex of uncertainty she had created, a labyrinth of mixed signals and confusing motives. As the first light of dawn streamed through the curtains, painting stripes of pale gold across the living room floor, Mike made his decision. No more hesitation, no more second-guessing, no more waiting for clarity that might never come. He needed to know, to understand, to finally unravel the mystery of Jessica's sudden change. The morning sunlight illuminated the kitchen, casting a warm glow on the Formica countertop as Mike sat at the table, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, the ceramic warm against his palms. The manila envelope, heavy with the divorce papers, rested beside him, a quiet, resolute symbol of his determination, his resolve. Jessica's footsteps were light, almost stealthy, as she entered the kitchen, looking bright, almost unnaturally cheerful, her earlier softness now amplified, exaggerated. "Good morning, honey," she greeted him, her voice sweet, almost saccharine, her smile wide and warm, radiating an almost unsettling level of pleasantness. "Morning," Mike replied, keeping his tone even, neutral, betraying none of the suspicion and unease that churned beneath the surface. She poured herself a cup of tea, her movements almost theatrical in their lightness, and sat down across from him, her expression almost too pleasant, too eager to please. After a few moments of forced, almost painful casual chatter, the strained pleasantries hanging heavy in the air between them, her demeanor shifted subtly, the forced cheerfulness faltering, cracking around the edges. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, her smile tightening, her voice taking on a more hesitant, almost playful tone. "You know, Mike," she began, her voice almost girlish, "this might sound a little forward, a little out of the blue, but I was wondering if you could lend me $150, just for a week, I promise. I'll pay you back next week for sure." Mike placed his coffee cup down slowly, deliberately, the ceramic clinking softly against the saucer. His gaze sharpened, focusing on her, unwavering, as the truth hit him. A cold, hard wave of realization washing over him. There it was, the warmth, the sudden kindness, the unsettling sweetness, the unexpected invitation to return to their bed. It was all an act, a performance, a carefully constructed charade. Jessica needed money, desperately needed money, and she was playing the role of the loving, repentant wife, the suddenly changed woman, to get it, to manipulate him, to exploit his lingering hope, his faint, foolish desire to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had changed. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with careful scrutiny, his gaze cold, assessing, dissecting her performance. $150, huh? Mike said calmly, his voice steady, devoid of emotion, his gaze unwavering. "Well, Jessica," he continued, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across his face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've got something even better for you." Her eyes brightened, her forced smile widening, her hopes rising visibly. She chuckled lightly, a brittle manufactured sound. "Better? What, 200? $500? She teased, laughing softly, nervously at her own joke, her eyes gleaming with avarice. Mike reached for the manila envelope, the white rectangle stark against the dark wood of the table, and slid it across to her, the crisp rustle of paper echoing in the suddenly silent kitchen. His tone was unwavering, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, final. "This," he replied simply, his gaze fixed on hers, unflinching. Jessica's laughter faded abruptly, dying in her throat, as she took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. Confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by a dawning realization, a growing unease. She opened it, her fingers fumbling with the seal, and as her eyes scanned the first page, the stark legal language of the divorce papers leaping out at her, Her expression shifted again, morphing from confusion to shock, then to a mounting sense of panic, a raw, naked fear. "Mike," Jessica stammered, her voice trembling, her hands shaking as she clutched the papers, the white sheets of legal document fluttering in her grasp. "What? What is this?" Mike met her gaze, his expression calm, resolute, firm. "It's exactly what it looks like," he replied evenly, his voice devoid of warmth, devoid of pity. "Divorce papers, Jessica. I've given this a lot of thought, a lot of time, and I've realized this marriage is beyond repair." Her hands trembled even more violently as she gripped the documents, her eyes darting around the room, frantic, desperate, as if searching for an escape route, for a lifeline, for anything to cling to. "Mike, no," she pleaded, her voice rising, cracking with desperation, tears welling up in her eyes. This is too sudden. We can't just throw everything away, everything we've built like this. We have to try, Mike. We can work through this. I can change. Please give me another chance." Ben shook his head slowly, his resolve unshaken, his decision final. "Jessica," he said, his voice low, steady, but edged with a deep, profound weariness. "It's too late for that. I spent months, Jessica, months trying to figure out what went wrong, trying to fix it, trying to bring us back to what we used to be. But every time, every single time, you pushed me away, treated me like I didn't matter, like I was some kind of intruder in my own home. And now," he continued, his voice hardening, tinged with bitterness, "now, when you need something from me, when you need money, you suddenly act like the loving wife I remember, the woman I fell in love with. But I see through it, Jessica. I see right through it." Jessica reached across the table, her hand outstretched, desperation seeping into her voice, her eyes pleading. "Mike, you don't understand," she begged, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face, blurring her makeup. "I've been going through so much, things you don't even know about. I never meant to hurt you, Mike, never. I just needed time to figure things out. Please, Mike, please don't do this. Don't leave me." Mike sighed, a deep, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of months of pain, of disillusionment, of broken promises. His voice was steady, but tinged with a deep, profound sadness. "Jessica," he said gently but firmly, his gaze unwavering, "I've had plenty of time to think. I've reflected on our marriage, on how you've treated me these past months, the distance, the manipulation, the coldness, the cruelty. This isn't healthy for either of us, Jessica. We both deserve better than this. I can't keep living like this, trapped in this toxic cycle." Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes, overflowing,